We are going to discuss today the power of technology in cross-organization collaboration. So we actually could look at this from quite a few different angles. I think a lot of it, and from what I've heard throughout the day, there's been a huge focus on people. Every conversation we've had has been about people and collaborating with people and how do we make that cohesive, productive working environment even better. And that can go from driving teams, driving innovation, shared goal ownership, you name it, we've talked about it. So before we go into our questions, I would love our fabulous panelists to introduce themselves and then we will get underway. So if we start from the far end and we'll work our way down.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing your wine in here to drink it. I'm Peter James. I'm the Vice President of Global Business Development for Shaw Incorporated. We are, for those of you that know us, we make microphones, these are ours, many more things besides. I'm sure some of you have our products in your meeting spaces. I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be part of this discussion, actually, about how technology improves collaboration. It's a hot topic for lots of different reasons.
Thanks. So I'm Richard Corbridge. I'm the CIO of a company called Seagrow. Seagrow is a company that looks after lots of large commercial, industrial boxes all across Europe, connected buildings, but I'm only on week 3, so be gentle with me. Prior to that, I was the Director General of DWP, so looking after benefits, pensions, and healthcare money that's required across the whole of the UK.
And I'm Lydia Nicola. I'm the Head of IT Operations at Amnesty International, which is the world's largest human rights organization.
Okay, fantastic, and thank you very much. So let's get straight into it then. So let's look at our current setups, your current businesses. I appreciate you've just joined yours, so, we answer as you can. From your points of view, what do you feel the role of technology is within your current businesses as an enabler of a successful collaborative effort? And how do you think that has changed in recent years? Let's go to you first because you've just joined.
I am literally going to talk about my old organization mostly, I think, anyway. So technology at a big government department, and we were having a pre-conversation then. The size of DWP has been the biggest government department, fluctuates between MOJ and DWP. But when you're trying to collaborate across the whole country, when you're trying to look after the most vulnerable people in the UK, you need tech to move data around, to be the art of collaboration. And I think there's a big part of that investment cycle now in government is starting to change because government is starting to realize that collaboration is the only way that we can be efficient, productive, and accurate. There's been too many moments in recent times where accuracy around benefits has caused huge problems, and being able to collaborate to try and help vulnerable people requires systems to do that. So I think at a government level, as opposed to specific to DWP, there's a realization that maybe collaboration is the heart of what innovation needs to be as we go forward.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to give your point?
Yeah, I can do. I think the state of where we are now, there's been much discussion about hybrid working and some of the challenges of that, but the data supports that hybrid working is working. There's efficiency benefits, there's productivity benefits, but there are challenges, but I think that technology is absolutely well placed to overcome those challenges, and some of the existing tech today is helping to overcome them. I think from a collaborative standpoint, the ideal is to take the face-to-face conversations we're having here and be able to have them at a distance. And that's okay on a one-to-one basis typically, but the group setting is much more difficult. And so we've seen that transition. It works very well. Tools that we're starting to embrace, things like Microsoft Teams, and particularly AI, are enabling that more so. File collaboration, reducing the number of systems people are using, that's really uncomfortable. But it's working where there's business benefit. There's less resistance to that change. It's always uncomfortable to adopt different platforms, but we've absolutely had to do that. As people went to that working from home and hybrid working, particularly through the pandemic, all of a sudden those tools that were being used occasionally by different teams to get by became such a hub of activity that the problem was really obvious very fast. So I think the turnaround to correct that has been pretty quick. Certain tools have evolved very fast to accommodate that. But the one thing that we've been focused on at Shaw to try to improve that is the audio element. It's often overlooked because if you can just about hear somebody, then we get by. But the cognitive load of hard listening is real. And there's a statistic I wanted to share with you just from the kind of the general communications world in interpretation. I mean, some of you may know this, but those large meetings, United Nations government meetings where multiple languages are represented, the limit on interpreters to actually, they normally work in a pair of two. So typically it's expected to work for 30 minutes and then swap 30-minute rotation. In symbolic languages, it's 20 minutes. Rotation of 20 minutes. So it tells you what the load is, that it's recognized this is challenging to do. And if you work in organizations with people that don't have the same first language as you, that's really difficult because when the quality drops, it becomes even harder. And as we've moved to this hybrid space where your whole day and beyond is in a second language, it's really difficult. So the audio quality element helps to correct that, and we've actually seen some really positive data from IDC research which supports that employees respect it, recognize it, see and feel the value in it, feel respected and more powerful. And the inverse of all that is true when it's not invested and is poor. So there's lots to come. It's really positive in some ways, but there's work to be done to really raise the bar on quality.
Do you think it's changed for you?
Yeah, well, I think the core of what Amnesty does is evidence gathering and research, and all of that requires information, which requires technology, which requires management, and requires collaboration. We are publishing a report today on Israel-Palestine crisis. About 150 people have worked on this single Word document, and that is just writing that Word document. That does not take into account the number of people who collected the evidence, who did some of the research. It doesn't count the people we've got on the ground in Palestine and all parts of Palestine and Israel right now, who were gathering very real first-hand evidence, many of whom have lost their families or are concerned for their lives right now. So we can't do what we do without collaboration, and that's incredibly challenging. But without the technology, you can't do it at all. So I think it's always been core to our business. But what I'm saying now, and I joined post-COVID, so I obviously didn't see that change, but people are more excited about technology than they ever were before. People are starting to say, oh, do you know about this SaaS platform? And they're actually beginning to challenge the IT teams on, well, why are you using that? It's not just, well, this is what we've got. And I think that's really exciting change that's happening at the moment.
My next question was about, do we think there's a level of expectation on our technology leaders to be the driver? But I think when we spoke about it, I think we all unanimously agreed that it shouldn't be. And because of some of the things that you've just spoke about, I'd actually like to ask the different question of, do we therefore feel that the culture of collaboration that everyone is involved in, we've talked about more people being excited by technology, do we feel like there's a risk of overload of tools and overload of platforms, making it more difficult to actually stay focused? Personal experience, me, yes, 100%. So,
I mean, without a shadow of a doubt, it is, isn't it? Everybody's got everything that their corporate gives them, and then the grey IT that they might have plugged in themselves, plus their own personal phone sat in their pocket. And somebody was saying earlier on about their organization took ChatGPT away from them at a corporate level to turn around and notice that everybody was using their own personal phone to do it anyway. So what was the point? So the amount of tools that we've got to collaborate are sort of overwhelming, and yet sort of the original genesis of the question was around, is it our responsibility as digital people, technologists? We've got to get the right platforms in front of the right people and meet the consumer need so that they can collaborate, because that's the lifeblood of our organization. And is the reason their colleagues are bringing other stuff into the mix because we haven't given them all that they need? And I think that's something we've got to be a bit mindful of, is the reason this stuff grows and grows is because we haven't given everybody what they need. And that may well be how to use the stuff, not just the actual platforms themselves.
I think what you've just said is critical. All of this requires training.
Yeah.
And that's something that historically organizations haven't been open to. They say, oh, well, everyone knows how to use email or Word, which has just never been true. But I think what we're seeing now more than ever is people are overwhelmed by the volume of options, by the volume of communications, and then they have their own software that they've brought in and gone, well, I used this at the last place. Yeah. It would work here. So I think it puts a burden on IT to get a lot better at communicating how you should use the tools and how you can step away from the tools. No, you don't need to have Teams buzzing you every 10 minutes if you're trying to focus. Put it on Do Not Disturb. But we actually need to teach people that, because we may play around with technology, but lots of other people don't.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points that were made in the CFO panel earlier today, which I found really interesting. And it was about getting investment and how to convince the CFO to release money. And it's really about business outcomes. If it's good for the business and you can explain what it means to the business and your workforce is engaged with why we're doing this, you should have a level of buy-in from people, but there is still work to be done to train people to use the tool. If people understand the benefit, why it's good for the business and why it's good for job security and future advancement opportunities, I think it's helpful. And that's not driven just by IT, that's then driven by the business embracing the tools they're provided with. But it's important to communicate that benefit effectively.
There was a session earlier on where we were in the same room talking about sort of working from home, hybrid working. And one of the comments made there was, pre-COVID, working from home, you weren't taught how to work from home, and there was never a concern that you couldn't collaborate if you worked from home. Whereas now organizations are saying, you must come into the office X percentage of your time, because that's the only place that you can collaborate. And we thought that was fascinating earlier on, that was the sort of the stick and the hook to say, you can't work from home anymore, you need to be in so you can collaborate around the brown paper and sticky paper.
I just want to say until I joined Amnesty, I never worked anywhere with an office. I worked entirely remotely my entire career. So it was actually a real shock when I joined Amnesty. I was like, oh crap, there's an office. I actually need to go somewhere at like a certain time. And it's got its uses, but I think I'm very aware of the benefits of remote and hybrid working. But to come back to your earlier point, it takes management of the tools and management of people's time.
Yeah, can I just make one point there, and that was from the same meeting this morning about time, and it's about how the tool is used. And I think one of the guest panelists made an excellent point, which is because people see gaps in calendars, we insert a request in there, and it's always 30 minutes, or amounts of 30 minutes, when in fact it's just a conversation, which might be 5 or 10 minutes. And so those 5 or 10 minute conversations take place when you're in an office together, but then trying to schedule a conversation with someone ends up being 30 minutes. And in fact, if we can find a way to work around that, use chat and other tools much better, I think we can collaborate using technology and overcome this idea to schedule everything in big chunks, which are just way more than they need to be. And we have this schedule overload that looks full, but in fact isn't. But it's confusing that it looks that way.
Thank you. I'm actually going to bring this conversation a little bit back to the initial concept of people being the focus of everyone's organization, which ultimately is why you collaborate, right? It actually seems almost impossible. I have the utmost admiration for you guys doing what you do, because you've got to balance functionality, security, transparency, expectation, delivery. You've got to do 1,000,001 other things, which is very late in the day, and I'm not going to name them all now. And whilst all doing that, as we're talking about collaboration, you've got to maintain those open lines of communication as well. So when you go back to what I said, you're thinking about your people then, and you kind of touched upon it then a little bit about, do they actually have what they need? How do you actually support then diverse skill sets, different perspectives on how you might deal with a problem? I mean, you mentioned people bringing things from outside. That's how they might deal with it. But you might have people that just don't want to do that. They want to sit around a whiteboard and sticky tape. How do you balance that to actually do more, problem solve, innovation, all of it?
Me and Doug were speaking earlier about it. It's fascinating how themes come back round and round, isn't it? And I think the theme through today has been, how do we as technology people communicate? Which, if you sort of wind back 10 years, that was the key theme, is how do you guys who live in the basement and do tech learn how to communicate? I think we've learned how to communicate now, but how do you have those conversations to empower, reward, and celebrate all the different skills that are required to collaborate for business outcomes? And the big debate upstairs earlier around product management versus project management, or product versus project, the same thing came about. It's about how do you bring all the skills in the triangle to sit together and collaborate to get the answer for growth or for outcomes or for whatever the business need is. Is it on us? So sometimes it feels like we are in the best place to be the ringmaster in the middle, helping people to talk to each other to collaborate. And it's been said on this stage, hasn't it, that the CIO, the person at the top seat in tech, probably has the best handle on the business right now when you look around at how we're trying to transform. And therefore, I think we do have the best skills for trying to help people to collaborate more at a human level, not just the tools level, but the human level.
I think it's that, but it's also a cultural problem. And can we change that to a certain extent? Yes, but that's not always by bringing in new tools. It could be through training. But I think, like most things, it starts with clarity of definition, clarity of kind of the expectations of everyone. What are you actually trying to do here? What are you trying to accomplish? We're not bringing this tool in just for the fun of it. So making sure, if you can start by making sure everyone knows, okay, you've got a Teams message. We expect replies to that within 12 hours. We've got an email. We expect replies to that within 48 hours. Not many companies are good at actually defining that kind of thing. And when they are, I think you generally get happier asynchronous communication and live communication when it's what's needed.
Yeah, there's a technology piece in there, which for me is always about, do you have equity and equality in meetings? As you bring people together, again, from disparate locations, is there equality in attendance? Because if the people in the meeting should be there and are equipped with the skills, mindset, experience, and responsibility to fix it, they should be able to. But the truth is that when you have differing experiences, and the sound is one of them, but video's in there as well, it doesn't work that way. The person with the poorest sound quality isn't ranked or considered with the same level of importance as somebody else. And so technology can and does, and there are tools that do that to get towards it, but that's not how meetings are today. So that conjoined consistent quality really helps so that everyone has the same level of attendance. But I also think some of the emerging tech like AI, I mean, things like Copilot as effectively a UI into AI is really how that would be viewed. Starts to help to do that. And I think that the one example I would give is using transcription of meeting notes in something like Copilot and other things that exist does allow everyone to partake equally. If you ask someone in a meeting to take notes, or the person who organised it takes notes, they're nuanced to that person. So certain contributions don't get represented the same way. So AI and those tools allow us a kind of a non-judgmental tool into them to help at least capture what's discussed and actually get a more balanced output in some cases.
I'm going to challenge that slightly and say only if you're a literate English speaker, which most people aren't, particularly if you mentioned earlier interpretation.
Yeah.
People can't interpret off transcripts. They're not accurate enough. Yeah. Running that through a machine translation tool is going to lose the meaning almost instantly.
No, I'd agree that transcription leaves a lot to be desired in isolation, but AI does a good job of interpreting that. And it's a starting point as a beta. I wouldn't necessarily trust it.
I think it's important we just don't think it's the silver bullet for equity.
No, not at all. It's certainly not a silver bullet, but there's definitely improvements there, and I think it's not perfect today, but it's definitely getting better, and it's getting better at pace. So it's an emerging tool, I think, that really starts to help to get equality in meetings.
There's the risk, though, isn't there, around AI and collaboration and keeping the human in the loop, that we start to lean too far into that space. So my son's 15 years old. Both me and my wife work in tech and gave him permission to use ChatGPT for some of his homework just to test to see what he did. Seeing him use that instead of collaborating with his mates to do his French translation was a bit of a disaster, really, for us, because it didn't prove. What it proved was that he could go away and write a comment that said, translate my French homework in the style of a boy of 15 years old who's going to get a C in their French exam, as opposed to go and talk to your mate and do the French translation and collaborate on the answer together to see where you get to. Massive skill lost, because it's easier to go upstairs and do that than it is to go and do the other side, which was interesting.
I think it's wild. And I'm also gutted I didn't have that when I was in school. But I have one more question, but I actually can't tell what the answer is, because you're all saying like really positive things, but then there's things that obviously need to be worked on. So I'm interested to kind of throw it out to you guys. I find that when I work remotely, it is never, ever a 5-minute chat. ever. Whereas if I was in the office with that person, it would probably be less because they'd want me to go away or they'd want to go make a coffee or whatever it was. So in our pursuit then, guys, of a more cross-functional, collaborative working environment, utilizing tech, do we think therefore there might be a risk that, unintentionally now, that we kind of sacrifice that individual autonomy? So we start creating a more groupthink mentality because you're in a million meetings and you think as a group rather than having that individual perspective. Do we think there's a risk of that? Yes? Rich? Oh,
Yeah,
no?
I mean, I do think that the amount of our capacity now to consult rather than decide and do is huge. And I'm applying that particularly to my previous organization where we would meet to discuss the agenda and what we were going to say in a meeting that a politician was in probably a number of times before you got there. So you've rehearsed at groupthink level what you're going to say to the person at the top. So by the time you sat there, nobody disagrees. So that's seen as a good thing, rather than let's have a healthy conversation about what is the right thing to do that this person, wise and proficient, wants the outcome to be. So I think because it's now possible to do that, we now do it rather than just decide. It blows your mind a little bit sometimes just how much consultation we do.
I think it's a risk. It's always been a risk, but I don't think that the risk has got worse because of how the tools have shifted or because of, we're kind of talking about remote and hybrid work. Yeah, I think people have always done that to a certain extent. And actually what it takes is company culture, training, and also strong leaders who can go, no, this is a pointless waste of everyone's time. Like, why are we sitting in this meeting? Cancel the meeting. And also a certain sense of meanness. Like, for example, I don't let vendors book more than 15 minutes in my diary unless I know that I want to talk to them about something actually firm and useful. Have agendas, make sure that, and we don't rehearse, we don't have meetings to rehearse because we don't have the time. But I think disagreement's healthy and it's important that we encourage that. But I think it's the same that you used to have everyone in a room, but one person had the voice. They were the one making the decisions. Everyone else was there because they were there to agree with him. I don't think it's changed that much. It's always been a risk.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's slightly company and sector dependent, function dependent as well as to how that works out. One thing I would say that I noticed inside our organisation as kind of partly pandemic consequent, and the pandemic was great in accelerating adoption of collaboration tools, but it also meant that we had this huge proliferation of multiple invites. And I saw some meetings with 65 people on or something like that. And if you've got a 1 hour meeting with 65 people, that's not a meeting. And we would never have invited that many people to a meeting in the past. So suddenly, because you invite all these people to a meeting, but back before we started doing this, you would never have done that. So we've been through a review of that recently. To Rob's point about doing it fairly well, it's been acknowledged that this meeting proliferation is not productive, and to kind of get back to what does it need to be. And I have to say that, again, using AI tools and things like Copilot as an interface has helped us distribute information to people quickly and efficiently and actually make non-attendance not such a negative hit.
It's interesting, your point there, though, isn't it? We used to collaborate before we had the tools based on the size of the room that we had.
It's true.
So how many people get in the room around the whiteboard now? Like you say, 65 people on a Teams call to collaborate on what the answer is not frowned upon. Whereas you wouldn't have dreamt of hiring a 65 capacity room to gather everybody around a whiteboard that often, other than big moments in time. Whereas now it's normal.
I mean, I don't recognize like this idea that you did it via meeting rooms. I never experienced that world because I worked different organizations. But I think one of the things that the organizations I've worked with that have been entirely remote or mostly remote, something they've done really well is I'm going to go back to that clarity of definition. Here's how we communicate. Here's what meetings are for. Here's what Teams calls are for. Here's what all those things. And I think that, again, needs to come from not just from IT, but also from the organization as a whole. But I think it has to start with IT, actually, to some degree, because no one else is generally willing to start that conversation. And we're often seen as the managers of the information or the managers of the communication somehow.
Yeah, I think it's part of maximising return on investment. There is investment in technology, making sure they're used properly and that people have the right tools and the right peripherals on the back end of it. Whether it's anything from any one of a number of vendors that you're using, there's going to be a peripheral on the end of it, whether it's microphone, loudspeaker, camera or something. There needs to be good standards around that, particularly for hybrid workers, again, to provide that equality, to make sure their contributions are as valued in a hybrid sense as well as a present sense, physically present sense.
I think that is actually the perfect sentence for us to wrap up on, because I definitely don't feel equal if I'm in a meeting of 65 people. Believe it or not, says the girl sat on the microphone, I'm not someone that likes to raise my voice. So, no, that's absolutely the right point. Do we have any questions or thoughts about this topic at all? Because I think for me, it was a really important thing to finish on, because all the other sessions throughout the day, ultimately, there's been that weave all the way through about how important it is to collaborate internally through technology, through cultural innovation, whatever you want to call it. It has been key. Does anyone have any questions for any of our panelists at all? Perfect.
What do you think about technology that is inclusive to enable cross-functional and organisation collaboration, such as employees that have hearing impairments, visual impairments? What do you think that is part of your responsibility to deliver, enable that technology?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to realize, haven't you, really quickly, that what we've got now is so far better than what we had in a pre-COVID world for anybody with, to enable us to be more inclusive. We had the conversation earlier on around neurodiversity and putting this camera on or not. Even simple things like that make such a huge difference to people. Allowing people who, and there was a chap in the session earlier who's a developer, self-confessed ADHD, was open with everybody about it and said, I have people who work for me who genuinely work in the middle of the night in their mum's basement, and our technology allows them to do that, and we don't make them come in and do anything different. And I think we have in our hands literally the capacity to be able to be more supportive than we've ever been before. And yet we have to do more. And that may come back to, like you've said a number of times, culture, education, and understanding in ourselves and our organizations.
But I think that also comes back to something you were saying earlier, is can people hear is a really fundamental question. And I have some colleagues who are very, very hard of hearing. They find Teams calls in certain rooms absolutely impossible. And the subtitles just aren't good enough to cut it at the moment. So yeah, I think there is so much more we can do. And I think that part of our roles as IT leaders, or whatever you want to call us this week, is that we need to be looking at what can we do to improve accessibility. And improving accessibility doesn't just mean this for one subset of people. It has to be for everyone. And some things that are accessible tools you find actually have a ton of use cases that you've never thought of. A non-technology example, but this is a classic one, drop curbs were always considered, they're for driveways or they're for wheelchairs. Actually, what happens is when you put drop curbs in a neighborhood, the amount of people walking around the area increases, because suddenly prams can cross the road. People with any kind of fear of falling on steps can cross the road more easily, as well as people with wheelchairs. Cars can get into their own driveways, and therefore they're not blocking the pavement that allows people to walk on. So I think anything we can do to help for one group and then try and widen that so it helps for others is the best we can do.
Yeah, I'm probably going to beat the same drum again a little bit about AI and what that does. But on the accessibility side, voice is data. So when we talk about every voice being heard, we often think about that in the moment in this meeting. But as we capture meeting content and capture more of that content more accurately, it's just data. And again, it comes back to how well is the voice captured, how well is it conveyed, and actually with whatever's happening with our ability to store data, quality data matters. And that does help us to go back and hear that voice again, and actually capture it for whatever benefit in the longer term. So I think technology is actually helping us to do that. It may not be perfect today, but I think it's much easier to imagine greater accessibility, greater equality, just greater opportunities for everybody through technology in that sense.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. I think it would be really great for us to try. You have got a very good way of ending on very poignant sentences. I'm sorry, I think you do. Right, everyone, you've been wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining our panelists. What I'm going to say is you do have further questions, or you want to chat about this, go and have a glass of wine and enjoy your time with us. We're going to be wrapping up soon. There's going to be more food coming out if you haven't had enough already. Oh my gosh, they've been bringing out some goodies. But on behalf of myself, thank you for joining this session, and I hope you've had a really good day. Thank you.
Thank you.